Do you recognize this person? Just keep it up there for a few seconds. Okay. So that was Richard III, or at least a famous depiction of Richard. I'm not sure if that one's painted from life. I mean, by a contemporary source or slightly later. A lot of medieval portraits were slightly later. Anyway, I'm making this video sort of on the request of a friend who mentioned it's quite a topical subject right now. I don't often make history videos specifically, but I agree with him, it is an interesting subject, so I'll speak a little bit about it. Basically, if you're not familiar, Richard III was an English monarch. His reign was a very short one. He ruled from 1483 to 1485, which is very short when you think about it, just 2 years. But it was a very turbulent 2 years. In that time, he is known for kidnapping his nephews. Just to provide you with the context, if you're not British, England at this time was involved in a very bloody civil war. Not the English Civil War, although it was a civil war, but the English Civil War was later on. This was Wars of the Roses, terminology I believe coined by Shakespeare later on. But basically, it was between the House of York and the House of Lancaster. Lancaster, I should say. And the House of York was represented by a white rose, the House of Lancaster by a red rose. Apologies in advance, by the way, I have a bit of a mouth ulcer on my tongue, so that's why I'm slurring a little bit. Anyway, they say more Englishmen died in the Civil War, in the Wars of the Roses, than during the entire 100 Years' War with France. That's quite a statement. But it's a further indication that civil wars are often the most deadly. Anyway, the reason this has all become topical again is because archaeologists began working on a car park site in Leicester in late 2012 on what was, I believe, the old remains of Greyfriars Church. And it's long been speculated that Richard III was somewhere around the Leicester area, but it was never known exactly where. I was in Leicester a few years ago in 2010, and in the cathedral there is a sort of plaque marking his grave, although he's not actually there. It's like more sort of testimonial, but I believe it says, "Here lies English monarch Richard III," something to that effect. But people going to that cathedral may be disappointed because he's not actually there. There's other famous examples of that. Famous people being buried in a certain place, but they're not actually there. But basically, Richard was killed in battle. I believe he was the last English king to do so, not the last British king, because there was a Scottish monarch killed at the Battle of Flodden. His name, James IV, I believe, was the last British monarch to die in battle at Flodden in 1513. But Richard was the last English monarch to die in battle in 1485. And although Bosworth wasn't the biggest battle of the Civil War, of the Wars of the Roses, it was absolutely one of the most important, one of the most critical in English history, on the grounds that it changed dynasties. That battle was a victory for the forces of Henry Tudor, who at that point was only a distant claimant to the throne, but he did go on to become king. The Tudors were an off-branch of the House of Lancaster, going down the lineage from Owen Tudor, and basically Henry became king, and that began the Tudor dynasty and marked the end of the Plantagenet dynasty, and arguably the Middle Ages in the English sense. In different countries it ends at different times. Some would probably include the Tudors in the Middle Ages, but personally I've always sort of regarded the Middle Ages in England as ending in 1485 and in the popular imagination. I'll just quickly show you an article in the newspaper. That's back to front. I haven't quite worked out yet how to show newspaper reports in a way that you can read them, so apologies for that. But at least what you will see there is a skull, and this is they've done DNA analysis. Apparently there was a guy in London who's a distant descendant of Richard. They took samples, and it turns out that that is it. That is the skull of an English monarch. Show that again. This photograph's been quite widely circulated in the British press of late. Now it's interesting, if you look closely, you see there's clearly serious damage on the skull, around the nose area, just beside the eye sockets. But you'll also notice that the teeth are in fairly good condition for a skull that's over 500 years old, which suggests nobility. Unusually, there was no coffin, there was no shroud, which often medieval monarchs had. But bear in mind, Richard was vilified even in his own time, so it's quite possible that he didn't have the honours that other nobles would have had for that reason. And the main reason that he is so vilified by history is he's widely believed to have ordered the murders of his young nephews, the future King Edward V, and well, actually Edward V was very briefly king, and his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, widely known as the Princess in the Tower. Now, whether Richard actually done it or not is the question. I think Shakespeare certainly plays a large role in the fact that Richard's been so vilified by history, and the whole humpback image sort of lends that, I guess, Machiavellian image. They recently done a sort of, I guess, I don't know what you call it, but they sort of done an interpretation, a modelling of how he may have looked, which is quite similar to the image, but it has to be said he's somewhat better looking than, I don't have that image at the moment, but he's somewhat better looking than even the portrait. There is a protruding jawline, which was distinctive of Richard, but if you see that picture, he looks quite youthful. He looks quite carefree, and he certainly doesn't look evil, though of course appearances can be deceptive. The great question is it time now maybe to reinstate Richard's role in history? Has he been treated unfairly? Henry Tudor was also a possibility for or one of the leading suspects in having the princess murdered. So there's a lot of questions about that. I don't think it will ever be resolved. Someone suggested to me Margaret Beaufort, the consort to Edward IV, I believe. So there's a lot of suspects in that, and it seems that Richard, as a loser in the war, so to speak, was vilified. One thing I think is worth pointing out, however we regard Richard, he died bravely in battle. There's absolutely no question about that. He died bravely in battle, and let's not forget, medieval battle was a gruesome, gruesome affair. Men could be hacked up by pieces of metal. Literally, it's quite hard to comprehend today. Of course, we have warfare today. Warfare is never pretty, but medieval battle really was something. Sometimes I think distance and time can almost desensitize us to the fact that people of that era, those brave men who went into battle of either side, they would have had fears, they would have had anxieties, they would have had joys in life, they would have been attracted to women, they would have had all the emotions that men today would have. I think sometimes we're removed from history. The fact it's so far back now, over 500 years ago, should desensitize us to the fact that in medieval battle, thousands of men met very brutal deaths in this way. Not just medieval battle, of course, but the reason I quote medieval battle is because I think there's an emotional disattachment from it. Um, and looking at the skull, it makes you think of that. Bosworth Field, the battle in which Richard died, which by the way is near Leicester. That's why there's a Leicester connection. And he was found on the site of Greyfriars Church, which no longer exists. Was what I was going to say was it wasn't the worst battle of the war. There was a battle, the Battle of Towton, which today has been somewhat forgotten. At least it's not a household name in the way I feel it should be. In that battle alone, some estimates suggest as many as 28,000 Englishmen fell. It was a dismal battle fought in the snow near present-day Leeds. It was a horrendous battle. 28,000. That's a staggering scale. They say in total there may have been as many as 60,000 men on the field, which almost certainly made Towton the worst battle on British soil. Oh, sorry, on English soil. Because prior to that there were battles in Roman Britain that were said to be worse, but we'll never know for certain. But no doubt Towton was a very bloody battle. And the Rollers, Shrewsbury, Second St Albans, Bosworth itself, Barnet, a lot of very bloody battles in the Wars of the Roses. A petition's been started. Some people believe that Richard should be buried in Leicester because that's where he was found. Others believe he should be interred now at York Minster because he was the last Yorkist king. So that's the question: where should Richard be buried? My own instinct is probably at York, on the grounds that that was his homeland. The only connection with Leicester really is that he died there. But having said that, they would probably have to do something like that tomb at Leicester Cathedral to change the writing on it or something. But there's no doubt Richard's seen as one of history's villains, along with King John. And I watched the film the other night, the Lord Olivier film, 1955. It's a good film. It was worth watching, definitely, but very theatrical, very, very Shakespearean in terms of what you would expect a Shakespeare film to be. And it's definitely, it's fair to say Richard's had a rough ride in history. I'm not suggesting that that's completely undeserved, but it has been said in Richard's defence. He was king at a time when England had been at war for several decades, had been violently tearing itself apart. Some would argue his authoritarianism was necessary to basically provide strong government. And maybe there is an argument to be had for that, almost like a bit benevolent dictatorship. I don't know if Richard's reputation in life will ever really be pacified, if he'll ever really be reinstated. But I think what we should remember is that whatever mistakes he may have made as king, he died a brave man. And we must remember he was only in his 30s, he was a young man. So that's it really, that's my thoughts on Richard III. I believe there'll certainly be more academic analysis of him. It is interesting, he was king for just 2 years, and in those 2 years he was arguably more famous than Henry VI, who was king for 50 years. So, interesting character, and it remains to be seen whether this breakthrough, the discovery of a king, is going to change his reputation. So thanks for watching.